Ready to hit the pause button on your parenting fails? Ready to feel better about your parenting? Welcome to Parenting Pause, the podcast, where all of you is welcome and where you can listen in on how other parents became the parents they always dreamed of being. I'm Leslie Potter, the founder of the Pure Joy Parenting Way. I'm a mother, a parenting coach, and a fellow traveler on this journey to wake up in our parenting. And I believe together we can make this a better world for ourselves and our kiddos. Today, I'm welcoming Amy Beth, who at 46 became a first-time mom. She shares her journey of parenting as a single mom by choice. So let's jump in and hear how her journey began and the ups and downs in her path of conscious parenting.
Well, I actually never thought much about whether I was going to be a parent or I wasn't going to be a parent. It was one of those things I thought, well, if it happens, great. If it doesn't, fine. I'm good. And then I was an art dealer for many years. And then I had this epiphany that my soul needed more nourishment. So I started working with children. And then something happened. I met a guy that I liked a lot, like more than anybody I'd known so far. And we fell in love, and we had this beautiful first year together. And I started to think, well, maybe I could have my own babies. You know, I hadn't really thought about it because I didn't want to get my hopes up, you know, if I couldn't have it. And during that time, I started to think about really wanting a child. I spoke to him a little bit about it. He was not so enthusiastic. I thought, okay, give him a little time. But then things started to disintegrate between us. It became clear that maybe we weren't going to go on together, and I asked him if he'd be willing to father a child, and he said, no, that doesn't feel right to him either. Anyway, I dropped the subject on the outside, but I didn't on the inside. And it started to become more and more potent for me wanting a baby. So I started preparing my body. I went to my beautiful acupuncturist, and somehow we stopped using protection. It wasn't my doing. I have a feeling this had something to do with Zoe's intention to be born. Anyway, I got pregnant surprisingly quickly for someone who'd never been pregnant before and who was 45 years old. My partner and I were pretty estranged, and I called him up to say, he was in Vietnam, and I said, look, this is what happened. And he got really angry and really rejected the whole notion of doing this with me, and it was kind of a blow. However, I was so happy to be pregnant. It was really the fulfillment of my wishes at that moment. The conception and the pregnancy part was a very magical time.
Had you thought about, like how you would parent? Was that there for you, or was it just like so excited to be pregnant that didn't even come up?
I didn't know how I was going to work it out, but I knew that it was going to work out somehow. But as it turned out, the woman that I was working in the preschool with, we all made this plan to come and live in Boulder, Colorado and start our own childcare center, which, P.S., never happened, but it was a really great impetus to get me out of New York, which I didn't want to bring up my child in New York. That was clear. Really, I didn't think twice about a lot of things when I was pregnant.
It sounds like something inside of your being knew, and that you were just so willing to follow that flow.
Absolutely. The something inside of my being was my daughter. She
Right.
knew what she was doing. She recognized she had to take charge of the ship because obviously I was not moving in a direction that was going to come to her actualization. So I had the baby, and then I was in the hospital with a C-section, which, was a mixed blessing for me, but it enabled me to be in the hospital 5 days. When I came home, things started to fall apart almost immediately. I ran a fever. I was very uncomfortable. I was very hormonal. I was very crazed, nervous, and it was lonely. I was lonely. And for the first time, I started to feel the lack of a partner. And, I went to moms groups, and they were all young marrieds, and I'm like this old single person. I'm like, what? I don't fit in anywhere.
Yeah, and as far as your parenting, had you been raised in a more traditional home, or what were your views on, how you were going to be as a parent?
I was raised in a more traditional home, I guess, for a Jewish traditional home, which is kind of a matriarchy. And, mom sort of ran the show in the house. Although she was a working woman herself, it was a little bit eccentric that way. She was an entertainer, and, I hadn't really thought about it, that I was conditioned at all. It didn't even occur to me that I had conditioning that I was going to have to deal with, because I was picturing myself in my new incarnation as an infant toddler teacher with tremendous amount of experience and ease with infants, which I did have. It's just when she got about, it really didn't start falling apart for me until she was about 4. And then I remember myself falling apart on the floor of my friend's office, because there was no place for me in my life, and I didn't know what to do.
So it sounds like at that point that you had been caring for her so much that you had forgotten maybe to include yourself in the mix.
I was very identified with her and who she was and how she was. I don't know who I was, but it was a being that I hadn't yet encountered in myself. I've always was known as so laid back. I was the person that people used to come to for advice and to handle things. All the panic and uncertainty and many things that I didn't allow myself to feel in my early childhood came very much to the forefront with my daughter. Fearfulness, a lot of fearfulness.
And do you feel like you managed that through control? Was that your modality at that point?
Yes, I do. At that early point, yes, I thought if I could just get it right, if I just could, whatever the right thing was. I remember kindergarten graduation, she completely, all the other kids were so, like, they did everything they were supposed to do. And she and her friend Elliot were totally losing it up there on the stage. And I remember the intensity of my feelings, how humiliated I felt. And like, oh my God, this is my daughter, and people are judging me as a mother for how completely ridiculous she's acting. She's ruining the entire, it was such a painful moment to feel, first of all, so separated from my daughter and my connection with her, that her behavior somehow reflected badly on me, and that bad reflection put me in a despair that I knew. That was a kind of a turning point. I knew that something was amiss when I was that triggered by her kindergarten graduation. I had a clue.
And what shifted? What is that when you started doing this work?
It's when I started being open to it. I was also teaching at the time at preschool. I could see how triggered I would get by children, by behaviors. Certain things just triggered me. Yeah, I started to do the work that led me to your door a couple of years later when she was around 7. I didn't know the full extent of what I was looking for even, or how deep it could go.
So I think at that time you joined one of the very, very first parenting groups that I began to lead. I remember I led it at the school that our daughters went to, and a beautiful group of young moms and older moms like you and I came and sat together and to begin to really get very, very clear that it wasn't a group about our children and getting our children to behave, but we began the deep dive and journey into our internal experiences.
And at first it was to not feel how bad I felt about how bad I felt.
Right.
That was my initial. I was so uncomfortable, and I really did not want to be that uncomfortable anymore. But then, of course, that the perspective that you offered shifted even that, which was not about not feeling the discomfort, but feeling the discomfort and wrapping kindness around it. I love that phrase. It just speaks to me.
So as that began to happen, because I know we are still going in that beautiful group, 10 years on, and I know as we began to learn together and grow together and offer each other kindness, that all of our parenting began to shift. And maybe you could give us a little bit of a you know description of how your relationship began to shift with Zoe at that point.
Before it began to shift, there was also a lot of feedback from Zoe. She started speaking more her mind about my behavior. When she was younger, I just frightened her. You know, I think she didn't know how to handle it. But as she grew older and her personality started to coalesce, she gave me a lot of good feedback about how much in her business I was, and how, the techniques that I had used to manage our lives were just not working for her. And she was very clear about it, and she manifested a lot of anger about it. And it was that really got my attention in a way, because that anger startled me. I thought I didn't know I'd done that badly. I didn't know that I'd been that unsafe that she had to fight back so hard.
And I know you've talked about that anger was quite scary for you. The tables turned that you started to feel afraid.
Yes, exactly. The first strategy was trying to get her to be kind to me, right? When a child is often aggressive or angry or whatever, we try to get them to change their behavior so that they're nicer to us.
Right.
So
How did
that we
that
can
work
be
for
nice
you?
to them. Not well at all. Things went from bad to worse. I mean, she started breaking things in the car. It's funny because I've never practiced safe seat in the way I've had an actual physical safe seat always where I've been, but I internalized it as a way to give myself kindness when what seemed was coming at me hurt something inside of me. And it was simultaneously clear to me that my daughter was doing the best that she could. And so obviously she didn't have anything she could offer me, but it came to me from the work that we were doing, yeah, this is something that I need to offer myself. Because every time I would start to give a should, or I have to, or I must, you always brought me back to choice and to choosing and taking responsibility, and not in a punitive way, but in a yes, I'm saying yes to me here. This is not about punishing anyone, including myself.
And for you mamas and papas who are listening, Amy Beth is speaking about the safe seat process. And this is a foundational process that we use in the Pure Joy way. And there is a copy that you can download if you go to purejoyparenting.com to the podcast. You will be able to download a free copy. And the safe seat is one of the most magical processes of all, to be able to come back into ourselves and to find a safe place inside so that we can show up for our children in a safe way. So as you begin to safe seat, find that kindness inside yourself. And what I'm hearing is begin to get some separation in your relationship with you and Zoe.
Yeah,
It sounds like things begin to really shift for you, and then therefore in the relational dance that you were doing with your daughter.
absolutely, they did. Relaxation is something that came into my parenting that I didn't have initially. Even if I didn't know what to do in a given moment, I still can relax. That's still possible for me. I can still relax even in the midst of uncertainty, and be curious and wait for what's next. And that spaciousness, I'm sure I was just suffocating a little bit before, the way my mother was with me, interestingly enough.
Well, of
She,
course, right? We've talked about
right.
I like to tell people, well, that was your template. What else would you know to do, especially when you began to move into a stressful state? So all of this, it comes so honestly, right? We have these templates, and I think then we imagine we're going to be these amazing conscious mamas and
Yeah,
papas, and then we get under stress, and it's like all of a sudden my mama's voice is coming out of my mouth. That's what I had, right? That was the skill set. That was the template.
that's right. And, of course, I thought I was conscious of it and that I would not be like my mother and blah, 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 blah. But you're right. When I'm triggered, what comes forth are my conditioned responses, and they always will. It's not that I've lost them. It's that now I'm not identified with them quite in the same way.
And you've learned to pause, right? I mean,
That's it.
such a huge piece. Maybe you could speak to that. How vital that capacity to be able to just pause.
It's crucial, actually. It's something I never allowed myself. Something about the way I came into the world. I felt and sometimes feel still that I'm being hounded. I don't know. It's a very anxious feeling. And I love that this is called Parenting Paused, because I feel that is at the crux of what has really shifted in me. Embrace of myself enough to take care of myself first before I offer myself to others. It does make a different reality come forth. We spoke a few days ago in our group about what it would be like if everybody asked for what they wanted and knew that they would get an honest and authentic response in return, that people would set their own boundaries appropriately. And I was not able to do that for much of my life. We're taught, in our culture, not to give to ourselves first, but to give to others first, and to think of ourselves last. It's not functional. It's not useful. It doesn't serve anybody. You can't give what you don't have. The way I felt, quite truly, was jealous of my daughter. Like, she was getting stuff that I couldn't give myself. It's not even that I didn't get as a child, that I couldn't give myself in the moment. That was not a kind way to behave to myself.
And as we've talked about, that begins to build such resentment for our girls and for our daughters, and that definitely begins to bleed out, yes?
Nothing that we keep repressed really ever stays that way. It comes out somehow. Expression has to happen.
So here you are, 19
Yeah.
years later now?
19 and a half as of June 1st.
19.5 years later, but with your beautiful, beautiful daughter, and
Oh my goodness.
watching her launch into the world. I would love, because so many people go, "Oh, yeah, this sounds great, but how's it gonna turn out?" And, yeah, I love that you have some, mileage here that you can share with us. What is it like? How is it to launch this beautiful being, and what do you notice about her, parenting her this way?
I noticed that she attunes to her own rightness, her own authenticity, has for a long time now. And I have total confidence in her and her ability to recapture herself if she loses herself, and to know what north is. And she certainly has not grown up being a pleaser of me the way I was of my family. And for this, I am extremely grateful. She has learned to say no with some measure of grace. It used to come out a little bit more raw when she was younger. I respect her so much, and I admire her so much.
And how would you describe your relationship now? Tell us a little bit about what that's like.
Well, it does come with a certain extra relaxation, because she does take care of a lot of her own things. She's spontaneously done this. It's nothing I ever asked of her. I recognize it, at least, that she's really, striving to be more independent, to take care of more things for herself. She's doing it in concentric circles, reaching out further and further, stretching herself more and more. And, when she feels like she has these moments where she's not sure or sad, it used to be really hard for me to listen to her sorrow. because I felt it so deeply, but I share her despair because my own is not so frightening to me anymore. I don't ever feel like I need to push her, particularly since this is a child that had Pitocin for 24 hours. You don't want to push this girl. But I see that without any pushing at all, she takes the steps in her own time when she's ready, even to the smallest thing, like, a month ago, she wouldn't call a restaurant to order something on the phone. So she was away for a couple of weeks at somebody's house taking care of their animal. Of course she called for food, Just funny things like that. Now it's a little bit of a joke, in a way, my doing for her. Because she knows she doesn't need it, and I know she doesn't need it. Now it's kind of fun.
Yeah, that's my experience with my daughter. It gets much more playful and funny, even our little neurotic qualities and the things that
Right.
we do, that we can be much more playful with those.
And she can be so honest with me about the things that I do that have her eye rolling. I mean, things that I could never say to my mother because it would hurt her feelings, right? I can take care of my own feelings. I don't need her to take care of them in that same way that I really, really used to.
Oh, beautiful. It's so beautiful to talk with you. And of course, I've witnessed your journey over the years, and such gratitude to you and your daughter for all that you have given to each other and the deep work that you've committed to.
It's been invaluable. Words do not express. So thank you.
Thank you to Amy Beth for being here today, sharing her insights and growth as she parented her daughter as a single mom. Parenting Paused is produced by Kim Paletti at Sound Mind Productions. Music by Jan Perchik. You can find the show notes at www.purejoyparenting.com, where you'll get access to the foundational practice of Pure Joy, the safe seat, and find links to relevant topics, as well as a transcription of the show. And if this work inspires you and you would like to practice, come join us in my free Pure Joy Parenting Practice group. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for being here today and listening to the Parenting Pause podcast, your partner and support in finding the joy in yourself and with your children. And remember, if you're about to scream, pause.